I'm going to introduce to you Jimmy Wright, who is the president of the Pastel Society of America, and he's a good friend, and he is a lot of fun. He will be starting here, and he says he does not mind questions during the presentation, so if you do have questions. So here's Jimmy.
Okay, we're going to figure out how we're going to do this once we start moving along, because it's a lot of people and we have little cubby holes here. So if I get too far ahead of you, I'll stop and let you catch up. I'm Jimmy Wright. I'm president of the Pastel Society of America. I'm an active pastel artist, and I'm a very opinionated instructor and artist. So I thought I would start at the very beginning with Albert Handel. Where's my reader?
I'm here.
What's the title?
The title is First Light.
First Light. So this is, I would say, characteristic of Albert's work. You would recognize it immediately. In 1972, Flora Jafuni in New York City started the Pastel Society of America. For the first exhibition, Daniel Green was one of the jurors because he was local and a notable instructor and artist using pastel. And I've forgotten whether it's 74, 75, somewhere along there, Albert also lived in New York at that time, I think, and he became very involved. And Flora was the first PSA president. It's the first society since 1914 for pastel artists. She invited Albert to teach a class, and that started the whole row for artists teaching classes that you now, it used to be all hosted by pastel societies, and then with COVID, we discovered the technology and we can all use Zoom. But Albert was there and was one of the first to do a workshop exclusively in pastel for Flora Jafuni at the National Arts Club. So I love this painting. You will recognize lots of people who studied with Albert. But I'm going to make one commentary. I'm sure all of you have noticed on Facebook, you will post a painting, and lo and behold, Facebook will generate a colored mat for your painting to sit in. If you click on the painting and just look at, it goes to a new page, it's just the painting, no colored mat, and the title. But AI will select a color out of the painting and frame your painting in that color. So what you're looking here is where someone got that idea. Albert has put an eggplant mat on this painting because in the middle of the painting you'll see a color key of eggplant that's really beautiful. But in my opinion, by repeating that color, you drain that high note of color in the painting. And also, because I grew up in the South in the 1950s, I'm used to little towns having a furniture store. And in the furniture store, and I loved this as a kid, there were vignettes of living rooms, of a dining room, of a bedroom, and they would set up all their prized pieces of furniture and hang a work of art behind the bed or over the dining table. So this kind of frame colored mat as decor.
Say no more.
Well, That's fine for the banker's house in a small town in the South. But I want something that talks about the art, and the house is, in a sense, enhanced by the presence of this strong voice or this strong aesthetic experience. So I look for frames that complement the painting, but do not take away from the painting. And in furniture, because I know furniture designers, it's called transitional. So it's not it's not Regency, it's not Bauhaus modern, it's a kind of neutral, a neutral frame, or a neutral colored couch, or a neutral design. So think about your framing, and I know all of us that use small frame shops, they're in business, they want to sell. They want to sell you the most expensive frame. When we end, we're going to end with Terry Ford's painting, which is behind you, and if you just turn around, that's a beautiful gold frame. The frame acts as a mat. In other words, you don't need a liner, you don't need a paper museum style mat. The frame itself acts as the mat. And those gold tones, that's a little more gold than I want in my house, but look how beautiful it is against the blue sky. So, Judy, where's my next one? Oh, it's around the corner. So come around. Wait, they're here. And I think if you also to stand in and right here. This is by
Matthew Kessner, and it's called The Baron.
The Baron.
The Baron.
And this looks like it's probably a leather top hat. So I went to school in Southern Illinois in a small city called Carbondale, which was the sort of summer or winter home for the Grateful Dead's crew. So I knew people that worked on the crew for the Grateful Dead, and they all had choppers. And so this sort of character study reminds me of a lot of dudes I knew back in the 70s. He's got on what looks to be like a leather top hat. He has, it's decorated. He's wearing a jacket that's got pins on it. And it's a monochromatic, almost study. But it's really beautiful, beautifully rendered with self-assuredness. There's no hesitancy in this. All the, I don't know what the sitter looked like, but it looks like a reasonable, it reads as a character study, and I believe this is who the sitter is. So I immediately picked it out because I know many of us do portraits or do portraits on commission. So the artist has chosen to frame it, but again, it's almost like, well, interestingly enough, it looks like a handcrafted frame with a kind of metal decorative detail. It's a little overwhelming for me, but it's still okay. This is, I would take the frame off if I were buying this and put it in something darker and plainer. But framing, when you're selling a piece and you're presenting a piece, you don't want people to look at the frames first. And here, I'm constantly distracted wanting to look at the frame. And the only time the frame is really important is if it's a 14th century Italian Gothic Renaissance altarpiece. And it's going in a Gothic cathedral. Then you can get away with all kinds of decorative flourishes. The next one.
It's over here.
you walk over there and read the title, please.
Over here.
Yeah. I'm letting people read. BF.
Okay, you want me to
Read your name.
Okay, BF Reed, Red Stripes and Reflections.
Okay, so I wanted to point this one out because not only is it a self-assured still life, but it looks like perhaps she's placed the still life on a mirror and she's outside. And it's reflecting a cloud in the sky. So suddenly she flips the space. In a landscape, the sky would be the deepest space, and here it's a still life, and the table it's sitting on is the deepest space. And I have to tell you, when you're doing portraits, when you're doing traditional still lifes, remember there are 100,000 million of these that have been painted before you. And so you have an obligation to be the best you can be, and you have an obligation to have looked at as many of those previously painted still lifes, to study them and learn a little something about them. So I thought this was a beautiful way to flip, literally, the space. It makes you stop and look, and you have to decide, what am I looking at? But at the same time, you have the satisfaction of looking at someone's fine china, their coffee pot, or silver setting, whatever is going on, and admire their ability to render those objects in a three-dimensional space. And again, look at the frame. It's just a white, simple frame. Good for traveling, for shipping. And this would go in a house that had mahogany furniture, and it would also go into a house that had IKEA modern couch decor. So it's a kind of neutral frame that enhances the art. It doesn't say, look how rich I am, but it allows the painting to say, look how confident and interesting I am. Where are we going next?
Right here.
Okay. So walk on in. You guys go and walk around.
I'll let you go. Go ahead.
Don't worry about it.
Oh, I worry. Karen Horn going to pot.
So I picked this because, well, all right, we've just looked at a still life. This is also a still life. Number one is the change in scale. We've gone from what in our pastel world, especially if you're shipping to a show, is a very large pastel, to one that we'd all go, oh, this won't break my bank account to ship. Number one, look at the frame. It's beautiful. Again, it's going to go in a variety of interiors. It's also going to look great in a modern art gallery. It looks great in this show. The black, wide frame, again, serves as a mat. And the whole purpose of the frame is to separate the piece from the wall and the decor around it. The sort of burnished silver sets the tone for this low-keyed light. She either got up in the middle of the night to go look at her flowers, and that's the light from the porch, but it's very atmospheric. The other interesting thing is look at how heavy the big ceramic turquoise pot is behind these little delicate flower blooms. So the fact that the floor and the shadows are monochromatic, it sets off this beautiful turquoise, and that plays against the red. But nothing overpowers what's next to it. So you're really brought in from this sort of top view looking down a beautiful atmosphere. It's an interior atmosphere. Maybe this is the front porch. And then she has a real command of an illusion of three-dimensional space. She has a real command of a sense of weight. You feel the heaviness of that big ceramic pot. And your eye goes into the pot. So you're going through this atmosphere, and then your eye is going into a three-dimensional object. So your eye's moving around quite a bit, but the artist is taking you there. So it's a very self-confident pastel that I found to be very beautiful and beautifully presented. Okay.
Down there.
Okay.
Okay. William Dewey Parker, Golden Reflections.
So, whenever we're jurying a show, I'll give you a clue how I encourage juries that I lead to work. You go through all the entries and you pick what's in and what's out. So, because the mediocre pieces are easy to see immediately, and you take those out. The very good pieces are easy to identify immediately. You're going to keep those in. And then there's a huge middle ground of good work that will be uplifted in the company of these exceptional few pieces. In that middle ground are a lot of green landscapes. And they don't distinguish themselves stylistically from each other. You might go, well, that's my pastel and that's my best friend's pastel. But I'm looking at it and I go, and you both have overwhelmed me with 75 different greens with a really harsh yellow. And I'm not interested in either of them. So in the world of landscapes, this is a really beautiful piece because number one, it sets up a narrative. How many times have you looked at a landscape and felt a narrative or an emotion or a sense of dimension? And the biggest mistake, the most common mistake, is painting a landscape, maybe even working plein air, and you leave out the essential element for life, oxygen. And oxygen is the space of the landscape. So look at your own work if you're making plein air paintings or making landscapes from photographs. Does the space give a sense of air? So if you go back to Corot's paintings, 19th century, turn of the century French plein air painting, you will always feel air, oxygen, atmosphere, distance, and then light. So what gives this wonderful narrative is not only that rich golden setting or raising sun, but we're seeing the back of a billboard. So again, I grew up in the South, and I grew up in the country, and I grew up in the 50s, and there was always the drive-in movie. Right? And you remember how large those big screens were, and as you drove down the highway, at least in where I'm from, the cemetery was across the road, the drive-in was on the other side of the road, and as you drove by, you looked at, or maybe approaching, you saw the back of the screen. And so here we're seeing the back of a billboard. So it's looking to where there are cars. So you know, man has a presence. There are highways in this landscape, but the highway is not present. So already the artist has set up a narrative. You're putting that together in this gorgeous light and atmosphere. So you've taken what is, if you drove up and down that road every day and saw that drive-in movie theater, you thought nothing about it. And he's done the same with this billboard and set up a moment for you, the stranger, to write the story that goes into this landscape. So you've gotten in the show. You've gotten in the show with a painting that has an implied narrative. It has an implied space. It has oxygen. It has depth. And lo and behold, nature has given you drama. Okay.
So you just turn it this way, and the next painting is right here.
No, strength is in space. It can be for me.
Okay, next.
Where are you?
Right here.
Okay.
Nadine McClursky, 3 hearts, 1 purpose.
So, this piece, first of all, we can't forget COVID. So, these are from Nadine. Are you here?
Hiding.
Nadine works for photographs. And how many have you made of this subject?
6, 7.
No, 7 pastels. So she's doing it as a series. And first of all, again, look at the scale. This is not a shy pastel. This is a scale that commands the wall. And then again, look at the frame. It is a kind of traditional, and I'm not a framer, Nancy Mertz, where are you? What kind of frame is this called?
It's kind of a scoop, angle scoop.
An angle scoop. So that's to direct your eye into the paper.
Right.
But again, she's chosen a beautiful dark frame, so it doesn't take away from all those beautiful blues. This is really to be called, if you didn't want to give it a liberal title, you know, it's a study of blues. And in those blues, that sets off the yellow, the complementary color, and then look at those beautiful reds. And so it has a sense of movement from the legs. You have a sense of different textures, different surfaces, from the reflective glass behind the figures to the kind of synthetic, surgical uniforms that you would wear from what's on your head compared to the cloth or paper mask, compared to, look at that blue sack that someone is carrying, these sort of plastic bags that are semi-transparent. So there are a lot of different surfaces in this painting. But again, look how dramatic it is in that dark frame. And again, it's a study of 3 figures walking. But there is a narrative, it's a narrative we all immediately recognize. So think about even if you're in a figure drawing class, if you look at the English artist, she's Portuguese-born, Paula Rego. She drew a lot from life, from a figure hired to pose in a model to pose in her studio. But she had props, and she made a story. She created a narrative for every figure drawing that she did. Okay, Judy.
Here.
Okay.
Bitha or Bitha Berman. Urban Rails.
Urban Rails. So we're also, I think there's a Brian and Cobble on the other side. We're now sort of looking at a realism that not only has space and atmosphere, it has incredible detail. And again, it's another landscape. It's animated. We're seeing the last car of a train. I can't tell if it's a passenger. Looks like maybe a passenger train. And again, small town Jimmy spent a lot of time waiting at railroad crossings. So even though I can't hear the bell, you immediately think of those hooded lights on the light post. We're not seeing whether they're red or green, but we know there's a light in them. You can recall the bump as you drive across the railroad crossing. And maybe over there with the red sign is the Honky Tonk Cafe. You're not allowed to go in because it's down by the tracks. And then you end up being taken into those beautiful clouds and diffuse light of the sky. So again, there's a huge amount of space. You have a sense of being in that space. You have a sense of air and depth and light. And again, I've just given you a whole implied nostalgic revisit to that railroad crossing. Again, notice the frame. Like Nadine's frame, it's neutral, it's a dark color, almost black. It is a flatter surface than Nadine's. But it does look like it has an angle going into the painting. But again, totally neutral. That's going to go into a collector's different environments for a collector. This may be in the bank president's office and not in a home. So frames are the second phase of your painting. It's sort of like, because I grew up on a farm and my father was the church treasurer, Monday he went to the bank with the receipts from the collection plate. And I can hear this the rest of my life. Charles, you're not going to the bank in your overalls. And he had to go back and change. Oh, we're going to look at the double portrait by?
Right. Eileen Dinger Stanfield, heiresses.
Heiresses.
Yes.
So, I don't know if you've noticed, in our tumultuous political environment, you see a lot about the British monarchy. There are monarchists still out there. And the strange thing that I've witnessed in my life is I can remember going to my class, going to a classmate's house because they owned a television, and we watched the crowning of Queen Elizabeth. We watched the coronation as I think we were in the 3rd grade or something. So this immediately reminds me of the British royalty. It also reminds me of a horse track. And now that I'm looking at one of those shapes, I'm thinking, probably wasn't intentional, but it looks like a horse with its head down. So it's putting on airs, dressing up, putting on a hat, putting on dark glasses like our friend Kim Novak, looking like a movie star. And it reminds me of Manet because of this, the flattening of the light on the flesh tones. And that's set off by the darkness of the hat, the darkness of the clothes, and then behind it is the green, which implies a landscape of some sort. I wonder if this is a race stall or something. But the focus is on the portrait of the two young women in the dark glasses. So again, it's an incredible narrative. Now, being a painter, I look at things and go, whoa. So if you look at the figure in the dark blue, and you look at the hand that's raised to her glasses, it disassociates itself a wee bit spatially. And I would immediately have fixed that. The hand is coming out of the sleeve, and it looks like maybe there's a bit of lace or something. I would have put a little dark line in there, just a little bit, to anchor it for the arm to go behind that little dark line, and then that connects it to the entire body. So the other thing, this is a very accomplished painting. That's not a criticism. That's an artist saying, I would have added one more note. It's a wonderful painting, and it's very, very strong. And why, when you do a portrait, can't it also have an animation? Look at their two faces and look at the expressions on their faces. One's thrown her chin up. The other one is looking down her nose. So again, there's an implied narrative. Okay.
Turn around.
Oh, this is Adrian's?
No, not yet. We're on the, no.
Wait till everybody gets here, they can hear.
This you're going to have to take turns seeing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, go ahead.
Kiang Song, Jeju Island.
So I'm assuming, I don't know if this artist is from mainland China or Taiwan. Korean.
Yeah.
Korean. Do you know the artist or familiar with it? So this is from Korea, so this is one of our international society members. I love this because it hits on everything I just talked about. There are a lot of greens. It's a landscape. Again, it's very deep space, and there's a form in the foreground that's very heavy with, again, you look under all of the weight of that rock. So that's a similar moment, similar to the small still life we looked at with the turquoise pot. There's a sense of weight, three-dimensional form, and that's set in a receding vanishing point as your eye goes over that rock, deep through the atmosphere, back into that semi-seascape. But all that time you're breathing in sea air and atmosphere and light. And you're not going, oh, my pastel is a painting. This is about this landscape has brought you into another world. And it's very self-assured. And also look at the scale, it's quite small. So again, that caught my eye.
Okay, next is over there, if everybody could move away from that. Okay, here we go. Okay, Stephanie Jean Brown, Days End. I'll get out of the way.
So in jurying shows, you have to put together an ensemble of paintings that work as a group. The first thing I will tell a jury is, okay, if you got 3 or 4 really good crashing wave paintings, I'm only hanging 1. So you have to pick which wave painting that's a motif, which with the crashing wave motif outshines the other. So one year, the jury for the PSA was a curator of painting from the Brooklyn Art Museum. And I watched her stand in front of a wave painting, walk across the gallery and down into the gallery, take the second wave painting in the show off the wall, bring it back, and set it on the floor underneath the one that's still hanging, and stand there and in her eye compare the two, because she was doing exactly what I said. It's the same motif. You're kind of locked into a preset painting, and she's deciding which one breaks the boundaries for that motif by making her feel the salt spray, the crash, the wetness, the sense I've got to run back, it's going to crash on me. So there are all these narrative elements that are translated by the formal way you paint the painting. But someone, maybe it's a potential buyer, maybe it's an awards juror, is going to be going through exactly the same visual steps that I've sort of verbalized. So this is a cloud painting. Well, every landscape has clouds. And in fact, you look at the light in this, the darks are in the front, the light is coming from behind the darks. And then you look at the little landscape next to it, and the light is on the edge of all the dark forms. So it's a very nice pairing of the two. The cloud painting, you see the landscape second, and it's in the dark, so you're seeing the silhouette. So it's right either as the sun is coming up or right as the sun is coming down. And you're not distracted. You're not distracted. There's no green in this painting. Green is really hard to use, and it seems pastel artists love green. And I think it's because there's 6 of them in the box or something, and they're in front of a landscape, and they feel that's a green landscape, I have to use these greens. But in fact, you don't. So again, I encourage you to go back and look at some Impressionist paintings, or go back and look at Corot, or go back to what's behind, the landscape behind a Renaissance portrait. To sort of train your eye to see, to not override your brain. Override, sometimes you don't look because you're telling yourself what you see. So when I do student crits, I make the young artist describe the painting to me as we're both looking at it. And you have to describe it what you physically see. And that way, we can discover the formal elements that don't work and the formal elements that do work. Let's go to the next one. Okay.
In here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Julia Cox Fletcher, Down in the Canyon.
So again, let me come up and stand in the corner. So again, another beautiful landscape, low-key light. Where the blue is, the sun is on the other side of the hill or the other side of the cliff. And you like, what was it, yesterday, day before, when it was so hot? It's like you sort of feel the heat, but you're in the cool of the shade. Where is the detail in this? It's implied in all the branches of what is a barren tree. So if this were classical music, that's the percussion playing, that's the flutes playing. These are notes that separate the form of the branches and the space that the tree occupies from this sort of stage set depth of a very probably warm landscape. You're looking for shade. Well, look at your shade on the ground. It's a bit sparse. So again, it's a landscape. The greens are all muted. They're there, but you have an orchestration of all the colors. So not one color screams at you. And in that, again, you have atmosphere and space, and then the shadows and the forms of the tree are the crackling sound that's only in your head, it's not in the landscape. Judy,
Here.
where are we going next?
Right here.
Ah,
We're gonna, here.
so behind here,
Chinokova, Chinokova, over light 3.
so I was talking about wave paintings. This is a wave painting. It becomes very graphic. The color is totally subdued. And you're on top of the surface of the water. Water tension and how it breaks. These waves are breaking. So you have this beautiful play of white on top of the darks. It gives you a moment to look into the water, into all of those darks. And it makes an abstract composition. But if you're in a helicopter, I hope no one pushes you out the door. Because this is an aerial view. Maybe you're on a cruise ship and you're on the top deck. But it's a beautiful painting. And so because of its abstraction, it's a very live painting. And again, this is a good frame for travel. Neutral, it's a neutral gray. The white mat picks up all the highlights of the white on top of the waves. So it's very, I would probably, if I were a collector, there's not anything I'd have to do unless I were going to hang this and I wanted a heavier frame or a more impressive frame. And then I would probably go with one of these darker, wider frames. But very beautiful painting. Okay.
Over here. Can you hear me? Okay. Vicki Smith, A Brighter Day.
Oh, I'm good.
Vic, you good? Jimmy, if you want to sit here.
No, okay. Oh, someone was You must have been listening. So I wanted to point out this beautiful still life. Not only is it wonderfully rendered, but again, I grew up with bell jars. In fact, I have a couple of blue ones like this that I saved. So it's a bell jar full of zinnias, I guess. Gerber daisies. So they're these kind of bold primary colors, and again, the greens do not overwhelm me. They've been darkened and sort of stamped down as a secondary player to these beautiful flowers and to this incredible turquoise glass jar. And then you're actually looking out a louvered window. So again, I've got three-dimensional forms that are convincingly rendered. But the main thing that I saw immediately, this is a cropped composition, which I love. And this is why I love Degas, because Degas, and this is actually, if you look at Renaissance portraits where the figure is standing in a window frame type space, you'd be surprised how often the side of the arm disappears behind the frame. In other words, cropping goes on naturally in our vision, but you need to start exercising it visually when you're making your piece. Or even after you reach a point where you pause and you come back to it the next day, I put down pieces of black mat and reframe it in my eye and decide whether or not I'm cutting the paper. The great thing, if you look at Degas, you know, Degas was the first to make snapshots. So figures are often pushed to the very edge of the picture frame, and you only see the sleeve and maybe a profile and a part of the hat. You don't see the full figure. So that happens in this painting. You don't see the top of the flowers. It's a condensed view. It's not a pinhole view, but it's as if you're looking through, I can't even say you're looking through the lens of the camera because I'm surrounded by iPhones, where every time you move, the frame changes. In an analog camera, the viewfinder, it's easier to keep it steady, and you can see the composition. Where I find iPhones, I have to give up and I just shoot the pictures. I hope I get all the information in it. Yeah. So we're entering a new way of looking because we all have an iPhone and use it every day to make photos. So this is sort of like an analog viewfinder framed composition. And of course you have the luxury of that in your studio because you can look at it and step back and start, put down a piece of dark mat or neutral mat and start looking at the edges of your painting.
Turn around, yes. Kelly Malukas, Fresh Fruits of the Keyboard.
So there were a lot of abstractions in this show, but I thought this was one of the stronger ones. First of all, I don't like the frame. It is neutral, but the brown sort of bothers me. It's a little distraction from the yellows. So I would have chosen a different color or a different molding. But what I found really strong is the composition is a mass, that's the red, and it's essentially on first view vertical. So the the field of your vision is this large reddish mass, and then within the mass are indications of space. So first of all, you're aware of verticality of the surface, the flatness of the surface, and this is essential to all modernist abstraction. In our world of pastel, you know, the most amazing artist who works in abstraction is Joan Mitchell. And when I have posted Joan Mitchell pastels on the PSA Facebook page, those have been the most controversial postings. Because to the vast majority of people who have no art school training and don't understand the Bauhaus movement in Germany, the introduction of Paul Klee as a painting teacher, and the kind of design elements of modernism that go into building an abstract painting, it looks like Joan Mitchell is having a lot of fun. Joan Mitchell's being so expressive. And everyone, many times people make the mistake of thinking, oh, she made that in 10 minutes. Oh, my grandson could do that. So there's a wonderful clip of where she's seated in her studio and being interviewed, but behind her on the wall are 5 or 6 pieces of paper, works in progress tacked up on the wall. They're all pastels. One may have 3 strokes on it. And the next one may have 5 strokes. I mean, they're sparse enough you could count the colors and the strokes. In other words, that's a clue as to her working method. These things, a line was put down, and here I go to Paul Klee and the Bauhaus. That line walks and talks, and it's relating to the edges of the paper. And she is one by one going through these pieces, adding an element at a time, studying them, trying to let those marks on the paper tell where to move next and what to color to apply next. So they're not just free form, I'm gonna dance, my abstraction's all about joy and I'm gonna dance, barf. They're hard work, It requires formal training, it requires an understanding of design, and it requires a critical eye, and that's a whole subject for another class, on how you train yourself to see your paintings, and before I come along and look at it, you've gotten there first and seen how you can finesse this to make it better. So I thought this is a very traditional painting. Maybe if you've never looked at abstraction, you don't have any in your house, you've never studied with a teacher that dealt with abstraction, this is a very traditional abstract painting, but quite beautiful.
Next. Okay, right.
This is my friend Jerry Greenberg.
Red number 2.
And this is like a study in reds. And that red and white striped cloth is just remarkable, it's beautiful. Number 1, it defines the space. It sets up how wide the tabletop is. It tells you where the light source is. And it has a physical presence. And that's in complete contrast to the flowers and to the apple, like Cezanne, which is very 3-dimensional, and then to the solid red tablecloth, which is beautifully defined as this part is in the dark and the shadow, to this part is in the light. But throughout it all, the thing that sings is that red and white tablecloth. It's very, and again, the scale is small, very good for shipping, very good for sales prices. The scale is intimate, but this could be a big painting. So I thought it was deserved a little recognition.
Well, you just have to turn around.
Okay, this is, I have to tell you, if I were a collector, I would snap this up.
It's like Anne F. Singer Regimental.
So if you read the text, they do a Revolutionary War instatement, you know, what do you call it? Where everyone dresses. Reenactment. And so she asked one of the British role players who's in his red outfit to stop, and she took a quick photo, and the face is entirely in the shadow. But again, who do I think of? I think of Manet. And even though that red looks like a solid color, it's beautifully nuanced. The arm, you have a sense of the space and it turning back into the picture. The hands are clasped, but throughout it all, it's that face in the shadow. And I went through a period where I collected, well actually, when I was a kid, I started collecting family album photos, because in the junk store you could buy them for 10 cents. So I had a whole shoebox of old photographs, and in one of my trips back home, a friend of my mother's gave me a family album that was of her uncle by marriage. And in that family album, it's from Springfield, Illinois, is a photograph of a Union soldier drummer boy. So it's like a 14-year-old kid with a giant drum that would march into battle with the infantry, right? And perhaps never come home again. So it's a very, in a whole album of sort of ordinary studio portraits is this incredible record of a kid that served in the Civil War. So this has that element to me. And then of course, topped off the feather in the cap. So he's being much more grown up than his age. And in the Revolutionary War, probably never went home to anyone. So I thought, and again, look at that beautiful, this is a green, but look how it becomes a neutral. And of course, red, white, and blue. Look at the canvas roll on his back. Again, it tells you about the space, and it echoes the space that you read with the side of the hat, with the feather coming out. Like this is an edge. If this were a landscape, this would be the side of the building as it's receding. This is the figure as it turns into space. And then his shoulders are contrary to that. The shoulders are coming back towards you. So there's a little torque implied. He's frozen in that moment before he moves his shoulders. So again, the space of the figure implied from the figure gives you a movement. That movement sets up a narrative. It's an implied narrative. It's not a literal narrative. The uniform is the literal narrative. So, yeah, and again, if you look at Manet's painting with that bright light on the flesh, that's the whole side of his face. It's a beautiful little painting.
Oh, stay, everybody. Arlene Tarpey, Constrained.
So Arlene and I did not know each other, but we went to school together at the Art Institute of Chicago. And one of her Chicago pastel friends was here yesterday, and I said, okay, text Arlene and say, synthetic cubism. Because this is right out of Braque and Picasso inventing cubism. The first phase of cubism was inspired by African sculpture. The second phase was inspired by all they learned from working on a flat surface with just color design elements. And in a sense, they invented modernism as we know it. And so this is a little study that's within the confines of Cubism. So if you go back and look at a book on Juan Gris, the Spanish artist, and Braque and Picasso, and you look at the second phase of Cubism, you're going to see this wonderful green. You're going to see how forms are stacked, and in the stacking, the space is revealed, and then it closes. So this is one of the elements of abstract painting. The visual space is vertical, and color moves in and out. So the color gives depth to the abstraction, and then your lines and the form give movement. So my eye is trained enough that I look at an abstract painting, of which we have several, and that's the first thing I'm seeing, whether that works or whether it doesn't work. Whereas my eye is trained in looking at a landscape, I'm looking at a different criteria. I'm not applying all the same criteria. And
Behind you. Lorianne Vignori, Beyond Boundaries.
so this is Lorianne's. Again, look at, it reminds me of my own work. First thing I saw was, oh, she tapes the paper to the board, which is what I do, and this is what I struggled with for like maybe 10 years, because I would, at the encouragement of my art dealers, use a mat to hide that. And as a consequence, all the early pastels are huge, because there's, between the frame and the mat, vertically and horizontally, it adds probably 6 inches, 7 inches to the size of the painting. So Lorianne has floated this, which is what I now do. But I do one more other trick, which is when I remove the tape, I color that exposed white, sort of matching what's in the painting, just to create a more neutral edge, because then you see the whole thing as a whole. She's also done something else very smart. The frame is the mat. It's all white. So she doesn't have to add a neutral zone. The frame provides that. And the other interesting thing is, because this is what, maybe 2 inches of white around the painting. All of Joan Mitchell's large abstract paintings, thanks to John Shine, a young art dealer that met her in her later years, he designed a white frame. I'm gonna say it's like a tray. It's a white tray that the painting sits in. And this imitates this. This is like a white tray that the painting sits in. So when it's hung on the wall, it serves as the mat, and it serves as the frame, and it's neutral, like the dark ones we were seeing. So again, it can go in a variety of environments, but this is a beautiful, delicate forms and color. But the frame was, you learn a lot from this.
behind you.
Okay.
Okay. This is Tom Bailey, Bits and Pieces.
So, I'm not a fan of where brush strokes become a style, and the whole painting overall is about the style of the brush strokes. But this is an exception, because there's always an exception. So there's this sort of staccato movement. You sense the hand hitting the paper. But again, a landscape, I am not overwhelmed by the greens. The greens are used to denote depth. Whether it's, I guess maybe it's autumn, I don't know. The negative forms are the tree trunks. So they didn't go in and put brown in, they left it white, like the paper. But if you look at it, there's a lot of pastel on those. And then the marks of the forest are blocks, small blocks of color, vertical strokes. Then you move into the slope that goes down to the water. And notice I said slope. I can read the dimensionality of the landscape. There's a slight incline. And then the next thing you know, I've fallen in the water. But the water is reflecting the same strokes that you see throughout the painting. So in a sense, this is like a weaving, and those strokes act as the fiber, the weave of the weaving. But I don't feel overwhelmed that this is a pretentious style. It feels very natural. And it never detracts from the beauty of the landscape and the composition and the colors. So in a sense, this to me is a very traditional painting. You may look at it and think it's very modern because of the negative spaces and the movement of the pastel strokes. We've got one more here in the
Right, one more here.
and then one behind me.
Barbara Janicki, In Motion.
So again, I thought this was a beautiful presentation of the crashing waves. It's not over finished, and when you come around, you can see how open the bottom of the painting is, and how those beautiful blues sit on the paper. It has a lot of drama, a lot of motion, and I thought it was exceptional. There are other wave paintings that are exceptional, but again, how many wave paintings have you seen, and how can your painting of a wave stand out from all the others? And it's not like, oh, well, I have to stand out from the crowd. It's like it's got to stand out in terms of content. And then there's one more around the corner.
Oh, you want to go around the corner? Or
You're right here, right here. You're missing one.
I missed one? Oh my gosh.
You're gonna get a cut in your pay.
Oh my gosh. Mark Price, number 2 Dream.
So Mark is here. And I asked him yesterday, this is, again, a very contemporary approach. There is throughout this painting a grid. And a grid is one of the basic first things I learned about good Bauhaus-based graphic design, is that you put all the elements on a grid, and then it's like a board game, and you move them around and you build masses, etc. But again, it's a flat surface. So his paper has a string or a fiber in it. It's a handmade paper. So he has a preset grid, and then he's making a beautiful, delicate, nuanced abstraction on this grid. So the grid, first of all, holds it together visually, but then he's playing with colors to create an atmospheric composition. So this is part of my love of pastels is their physicality. The second part of my love of pastels is paper and my response to, in particularly, handmade papers. Though I've now discovered UPO, which is a total plastic paper, and I've done very small sketches that combine an ink underpainting with pastel on top of the UPO, which it doesn't absorb, it just hangs right on the surface, so then I have to fix it with, and I use Spectrafix. But so materials, the sensuality of the pastel and the pigment is part of your attraction to wanting to work with pastels. Okay, Judy, where are you?
She's right here, we're over this way.
Okay.
Oh, Mia.
Okay, I have 3 pieces here. Four. Okay. Jean's painting, traditional portrait, beautiful frame. If this were a commission, they're going to be very, very happy. Even though I'm sure their grandmother is distressed that their granddaughter dyed her hair green. And if you look at the portrait, there's a little bit of a sullen presence of a rebellious spirit. I like how it's tight, it's cropped. I like that it's 3-dimensional, it's very solid. And I see this in Manhattan every time I walk out the door because my neighborhood now looks like a college campus. And everyone, boys and gals, have colored hair. And sometimes it is absolutely spectacular. But it's like Friends, and the daughter got a little piercing on the side of her nose and then was afraid to show, fearful of what grandma was going to say the first time she saw it. So I like that it's a very traditional painting, but it has a completely contemporary feel. They didn't turn her into a Sunday school perfect child. Next to it, Judy, where?
Amanda Houston, Reflective Illusions.
So again, frame is gorgeous. Similar to Lorianne, there's this white background that the painting sits on, so that serves as the mat, and it floats on the piece. But this is just amazing. This is pastel on copper, which I've never seen. I have a friend that paints oil on copper. So immediately I'm wondering how she fixed this, what pastels did she use, and I'm immediately thinking, does Sennelier have enough stick to it? Schmincke wood, you know, what brand is gonna stick, and what is her ground that she's putting on the copper? But all of that aside, it's a beautiful atmospheric painting like Lake Monet. It's tiny in scale compared to Lake Monet's giant billboard-sized paintings. And then, oh my God, that's copper. You can feel the weight and the hardness of the surface. And that little edge of copper is reflected in the frame she chose. And it's all very understated. This is where I would use the word handsome. This is a very handsome painting and framing. And yet it's very modern, and it's also very poetic. But it's all about, for me, visual, the richness of all the materials, from the frame to the ground to the pastels. So very seductive piece.
Charles Peer, Catching the Late Train.
So because this painting picks up on that copper edge, I immediately thought Charles's painting is interesting because he has used a gold to pick up the light on the subway station. You will see the figure at the end of at the beginning of the platform over on the right side. Maybe you're on the train going by and you look out and there's this sort of theatrical vignette. That's a platform across all the tracks. And you will see that the structural beams holding up the subway tunnel are slightly blurred, so it's as if you were in the car going by. And again, suddenly there's a narrative. This is a stage set. It's a drama. It's a film noir in color. And here is this solitary figure looking out across an empty platform, waiting for a train. And then again, look how beautiful that rich blue, which you don't see at the beginning, plays off those yellow amber colors, all submerged in darkness. And then all that's picked up in the frame, which is in a sense a cliche, but it works beautifully. So I love this. And of course, how many hours of my life have I spent on subway? This is Brian Cobble.
Brian Cobble, rich top accents.
Stars of pastel artists, contemporary pastel artists. It has everything I would want in a landscape. Space, atmosphere, heat, distance, shadow, sun, brilliant light off in the distance. And every inch of this painting is detailed, full of realist information. And I never feel he's showing off. It's very understated, which is his personality. But this is a masterpiece. And again, look at the frame. Instead of being inverted, going into the painting, the frame reverses that and flips the space out. But in doing so, holds the painting in that outer space. So it's a very beautiful way of framing it. And very, always secondary to the painting. Judy, where?
Here I am.
Okay. Looking at Judy's painting. What's the title?
All right. Judith Kasdam leads Stage of Aging. What's happened?
So, she has a whole story she can tell me. What's remarkable about this painting are two things. One is the backlight. So you're looking at the figure within a shadow. But the most remarkable thing, besides the light on the hands, the light on the edge of the arms, and that incredible light coming through the hair, you could replace that with clouds, right? Setting sun through the clouds, is the animation of the face. This is a living character. It's not a summary of growing old. It's an individual who is grown old. So this is like a character study. So again, that's where the painting is animated, not in a formal sense, but again in a narrative sense. Who is this man? What kind of life has he led? So again, plain figure. We've all done figures, or maybe you've all avoided figures. But this has a real presence. And this is a little atmospheric landscape.
Kim Eshelman, Nightfall.
No green. There's a tiny yellow light in there, complementary to the blues. I mean, you used to see people will put a red speck in the middle of their green landscape, right? So this is a kind of cliche way of resolving the painting, but I don't notice it. It all works as a whole. Again, I love the depth going into the darks, but there's light past the darks. So again, this is a painting that has air and movement and atmosphere. I'm sort of going a little faster now. Judy, where are you?
Michelle Ashby, Tide.
So Michelle, lives in England, and she's not here this year. She was here 2 years ago for IAPS. She is a former illustrator. She works only in pastel pencils, which I never use. A pastel pencil is going to have more, I'm going to call it medium, the thing that holds it together, because it has to be a harder stick, and that stick is so thin and narrow it has to be in a wood case, a pencil, to hold it all together. And then if you ever bought your first pastel pencil, you whittle away half of it trying to sharpen a point. So it's quite tricky, but it's perfect for, I don't know what her ground is, but I am making an assumption that she sets up a still life and she lights it and she photographs it and she works from a photograph, and maybe she works from the photograph and the object. But these are, I suspect, basically work from a two-dimensional image. But no amateur. All the forms are breathtakingly realistic, as is the space. So, no wonder it won a prize.
Daniel James Keyes, heirloom tomatoes.
So, Daniel was first an oil painter, has a whole career as an oil painter, and has now started in pastel. What I wanted to say is, this is a long horizontal. The still life is very placed to work as a horizontal. And you can start on the left side and walk your eye all the way over to the right side. Every object, meaning every tomato or flower or vessel or vegetable, is painted with the same importance as the object next to it. So it's a frieze, a long sequence, each one as important in its rendering and application of the pastel as the one on the right side or the left side. So there's no drama. There's no drama. All of us are equal. So where does the drama come from? How does, besides the placement and the form and the leaves, what's going to give you a lift? What's going to take you someplace else? Well, color. But you look at this, it's a miracle of rendering, as much so as Brian Cobble's in the other room. It's totally self-assured, it's totally convincing. Your eye goes into the volume of that copper pot, just as your eye is going across, and you know the texture, the sort of squeaky smoothness of a ripe tomato that's firm. So you have a tactile familiarity with every object in this painting. And then where is it? It's on dirt. And those are vines in the garden. So, well, now I'm smelling it. I'm smelling those fresh tomatoes. And I know daisies don't have a perfume, but the perfume is the light on the orange, the light on the kind of neutral yellow of the flowers, the highlights on the onion. And again, look at that onion skin in relationship to the copper pot, in relationship to the surface of the tomato. It's all familiar. You are bringing your familiarity to these surfaces, to this painting, because he's rendered them so convincingly. So there's real power in technique. And this is, if you look at a Dutch table setting, still life, this is in that kind of a tradition. Next.
Ready to ride.
Oriental of this. I mean, I can, that's a little too abstract. So this is, I love this little pastel because the narrative, it has a real narrative. I've stepped into really a British spy movie. And I think there were 3 of them that were entered. It's like, I'd like to see 20 of them. They were like stills for a storyboard from a spy movie. These men in suits, there were men and women in office clothes, on a tram, looking out onto a city landscape that's sort of, all the color has been bleached out. And it's like, here's the guy in the brown hat, and he's the spy, and he has the microfiche, and he's about to make a drop. But he doesn't know he's about to be shot. But you know that. So there, again, talk about a narration from just, maybe you were in Warsaw and took photos. What was your source material?
Actually, this was in a train ride from New York to Albany and back.
There you go. So she was on the Metro or the Amtrak. These do not look like normal office commuters. Again, a ordinary scene taken from life, but when you're framing it and putting it into a painting, it has to live on its own. And here she simplified the forms, and it tells me a story. Maybe it told you a totally different one. But I love the whole series, and like I said, if I were a gallery owner, I'd say, okay, I want to do a wall of 20 of these. Okay, there you go. Judy, where are you?
Okay, you turn around. Corey Pitkin, shoegazing.
And then what else is there? Adrian's? Okay. So what can I say about Corey's painting, except look how tender and personal this is in a very traditional, instructive way how to paint realistically. It's a very touching moment. It's like you walked into the room and interrupted him as he's in a moment of self-reflection. And therefore, it's a really exceptional painting because it could have been pretty boring, but again, what does it have? It's got incredible technique. It's got painterliness for those of you that are stuck on my pastels or painting. But again, it has the figure giving you a private narrative that's implied by the pose and by the rating. So again, we've looked at 3 exceptional realists in a row. I'm sorry, they were all guys, but 3 exceptional realist painters.
Adrian Giuliani, Sunlit Roses.
Which is around the corner, and I'm going to let you all look at that on your own. But it's unexpected color, and it relates very much to my own still life paintings that I've done. The difference is this is a small study, and my paintings would be 6 foot high or 8 foot high. But I love the abstraction of the flowers, the marks in the dark. It's like an overall dark silhouette of the still life, And then there are highlights of little abstract color that represent the flowers, and then that kind of unexpected yellow in the background. So it has a real expressionist feeling to it. And again, were this my painting, I would be going, how can I crop this? How can I make it a little tighter? How can I make this 6 feet high so I can blow the scale up and catch you unawares that it's just an ordinary still life, but you've walked into the picture frame. So I thought this was a very beautiful painting. And I'm gonna, is this the last?
One,
Yeah.
Terry.
Terry says the last one, and what a great painting to end on.
Terry Ford.
Terry Ford and the
Basking in dusk.
so this is, you know, the setting sun across the western landscape. Look at those gorgeous violets, that gorgeous blue. She's a master with color. She's a master with atmosphere. She's a master at space. This is a landscape you can breathe in. And then everything I've said about frames, this beautiful gold frame, it's not only the frame, it's a matte, and it enhances, and those colors already sing, but now they really do sing in this beautiful gold. So thank you very much.
Thank you.